We start with a geriatric elf telling us about how incompetent his boss Santa Claus is, given that cookie-munching fat ass somehow didn't notice a small infant crawling to his bag what he just casually left open on the floor of a local orphanage. And once back at his workshop in the North Pole, which seems to be staffed by little people who are always jolly and cheerful despite working 24/7 for no pay, Santa can't believe he's just watched a sprog come out of his sack when he was assured by his doctor that he had the snip 20 years ago. A Sam sheet. So they name him Buddy, and totally keep the topless human toddler what somehow didn't freeze to death on the way back to the North Pole in the back of an open sleigh, and promptly bung him off on the local incel, who was apparently so busy making toys all his life that he forgot to find himself a girlfriend and get to the baby making of his own. Not a joke. So naturally, Puppet Elf raises him as an elf, given they want to be as inclusive as possible despite him being too big for their chairs, beds and bogs. And whilst at school, he learns the 3 central tenets that make up the code of the elves. 1. Treat every day as Christmas. 2. There's room for everyone on the nice list. And 3. Never eat the yellow snow. I mean, the best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear and sheep. Anyway, turns out he's proper useless at his one job at making toys, so Puppet Elf instead teaches him about fixing sleighs and about something called the Kringle 3000, which is a reindeer power turbo booster that helps Santa get his diabetic arse off the ground given Christmas spirit is so low nowadays, and so the sleigh needs all the help it can get. And then goes on to tell him how no one down south really believes that a fat old bloke in a red suit is real and ejaculates presents from his sack just for kiddies all on a single night of the year. And so they have a real energy crisis on their hands, given said sleigh runs on Christmas cheer and for some reason not on a more practical fuel source like petroleum or diesel. But to be honest, I don't even know why he bothers if people don't believe in Santa, and so parents just end up buying their kids presents every year and pretending they're from him anyway. And come to think of it, who do they think keeps bringing random Crimbo gifts for their children and raiding their biscuit tin in the night? I guess they just don't acknowledge any of it. Gah! A universe where people deny the obvious reality right in front of their face? I mean, can you even imagine? But anyway, Buddy soon overhears how he's really a human being from down south what an old fat bloke trafficked over the border and was promptly given to a childless other old bloke, along with new clothes and a fresh identity. And he just can't believe he's been lied to all his life, and nor that he never put 2 and 2 together even though he never fit in the shower, houses or photographs. And how the local plumbing presumably broke down every time he took a human dump and stuff.
Damn!
So, after he has a meltdown and squashes a random colleague flatter than Prince Elrond's face, Puppet Elf explains all about his tragic backstory, and how his skank of a mother called Susan Wells put him up for adoption and then got herself deaded, whilst his real dad called Walter Hobbs didn't even know he was a thing. So, after Colonel Sanders cosplaying Snowman convinces him to go find his real family and find out who the hell he is, Santa tells him to be careful on his trip to New York City because it's currently full of nutters pushing innocent people onto train tracks, and also where that naughty orange man used to live. I mean, because it's full of litter and gum all over the streets, and also because his daddy Walter is on the naughty list and stuff. Because in a shocking twist, what no one could ever see coming, turns out a high-flying corporate capitalist is a greedy selfish arsehole that cares for no one but himself.
No way!
But Santa soon suggests that Buddy could help redeem him with some Christmas spirit and all that other gay shit. So, after saying his goodbyes to his phony fakey elf daddy and also to a hilariously cute whale creature called Mr. Narwhal, he makes the long and arduous trek through the candy cane forest and also the friggin' Arctic without even breaking a sweat, all through the magical power of a Christmas montage. And after arriving in the city and almost getting himself killed whilst trying to give out hugs to local wildlife and also speeding cars, he soon finds a world of imposters, liars, and aggressive blokes what beat you up just for being the only one who willingly takes their crappy flyers. So after gobbling up all the free gum what some silly Billy has just left behind on a small railing, this painfully naive numpty heads on up to the top of the Empire State Building and immediately gets mistaken for Pete Davidson. I mean, a painfully unfunny man-child dressed in silly clothing. And after his dad signs off on a half-finished children's book that's missing a full 2 pages just to boost his publishing company's fourth quarter earnings, Buddy bursts in and tells him he's his long-lost son and loves him very much. But naturally, Walt just thinks that someone's hired that bloke off of SNL back in the day to send him a Christmas gram for a laugh. But it's only when he mentions that Susan Wells bird that he calls security to turf this nutter out. So after getting aggressively hugged by a passing taxi and then eating perfume in a local department store, Buddy soon gets caught leering over some kinky lingerie by an obese chocolate fella. What is so good at his job that he just assumes that some rando in an elf costume must be part of his team, and therefore needs to get back to work downstairs in the kiddie area. And before you can say, wouldn't you have interviewed this guy if he was part of your team and I just hope he's passed his DBS checks, said rando in an elf costume totally flips out when he learns that Santa's coming tomorrow morning and just can't wait to see his old pal what totally trafficked him across state lines and also national borders as a tiny child. And speaking of excitement, he soon gets a raging lob on when he spots a top totty blonde tart fiddling around with some bulbuls, and kinda wishes they were his bulging bulbuls she was playing around with. Or maybe that's just a bit of projection on my part. Anyway, turns out her name is Jovi, and given she's moodier than Sharon Osbourne after living with bat botherer Ozzy Osbourne for 40 years, he tells her to cheer the fuck up because it's Christmas, bitch, and the best way to spread crimbo cheer is singing loud for all to hear. But she says she's too cucked to sing in front of strangers, so shut up about it already. So whilst Buddy spends the entire night decorating the gaff and also messing about with Legos, Walter flips through his old yearbook and finds that black and white photo of him and his old floozy Susan back in the day, which is the exact same pic what Buddy showed him earlier and stuff. The next morning, Buddy tries to deliver his daddy a little gift, but soon gets turfed out again given he's technically an undocumented immigrant and also super annoying. So naturally, he self-identifies as transgender, so he can enter the women's box and listen to a nudie naked lady in the shower. And after promptly learning a harsh lesson about voting blue no matter who and living in a city what don't care about sex-based gender rights, Jovi soon tells him that perving on women singing to themselves in a small bathroom just ain't fucking on, son. But he says she has a lovely voice and should start singing publicly, like on the X Factor and stuff. But suddenly, the chocolate boss fella appears. You know, the guy what just assumes strange-looking men leering over fetish gear works for him just because they dress in funny costumes and then takes them down to the children's department and lets them wander around totally unsupervised? Well, he worries that someone's after his job, given some fucker has stayed up all night making the place look rather lovely and thereby making him look like a right mug in the process. But also suddenly, Santa turns up. But weirdly, this one looks pretty rough and stinks of beef and cheese. So naturally, Buddy turns detective and totally interrogates the phony fakey Father Christmas, what apparently sits on the throne of lies, and then pulls off his false beard and soon gets into a full-on scuffle with the Yuletide imposter. After receiving Buddy's gift of a homemade card and also saucy underwear from his own potential son, Walter bails a 6'3" creepy cosplayer out of jail and then takes him for a paternity test, where it's somehow revealed in the span of a few hours that he is indeed Walter's long-lost boy, and now he's totally stuck with him and she. So after he spends the afternoon trying to get his special needs son to stop stuffing his belly full of cotton balls, Walter warns his wife Emily that their newfound relative might just have severe mental issues, and that they're just going to have to indulge it for a bit until he can move past his clear childhood trauma and stuff. But luckily, she's totally fine with having her husband's bastard son with the mental age of a 5-year-old live with them and drinking all their fizzy pop and shit. But their boy Michael thinks that his new big brother is a right weirdo, given he keeps doing big burps and pouring heaps of maple syrup on everything, and naturally don't really want to be left in the same room with him, to be honest. And before you can say, how's this fella not got rampant diabetes if he's lived on pure sugar for 30 years and presumably never even had a single vegetable in his goddamn life? We cut to the next morning, where Walter tells him to get some proper clobber and at least start with losing the tights ASAP. So naturally, the dopey elf soon drops trowel and immediately exposes his candy cane to his new stepmummy. Well, we've all done it. Later, Walter gets bollocked by his boss for shipping a children's book with 2 full pages missing, and says you better come up with a new idea and pitch it to me on December 24th, or else you'll be out on the streets giving blowjobs to mall Santas come Christmas Day. Or some shit. Meanwhile, Buddy harasses Michael at school and then stalks him down the street, but soon earns the little lad's respect and thanks when he saves him from a sudden ambush by a bunch of local bullies. and Buddy soon launches a flurry of deadly snowballs at their naughty arch-enemies. And before you can say, I thought he was a simple human raised by elves, so how has he now got super speed powers? They totally knock all their foes unconscious and say,
What? Did we just become best friends? Yup!
After the pair do some more bonding, and Mikey moans about how his workaholic dad is a total workaholic and don't care about anyone but himself, he gives his big bro tips on how to woo the ladies, given he's a virgin incel that's never touched a girl before, and soon ends up with a date with Jovi for Thursday evening.
It's about damn time.
Also later, a stressed out Walter just can't take any more of Buddy's wacky antics, like chopping down publicly owned Christmas trees and smashing up their furniture for wood to build a random rocking horse in the dead of night. But Emily says just because this fella pervs on naked women in the showers and commits actual felonies every day don't mean he's a bad guy or nothing. And at least Michael is a little happier now he has a sibling that smacks up children in small parks. So she just suggests taking his new son to work with him tomorrow. And at said work with him tomorrow, Walter gets instantly annoyed by Buddy's nonsense, answering phones and asking his high-end clients what their favourite colour is and shit. So soon sends his curly ass down to the mailroom so he can get a bit of peace and quiet. And also so his crack team of writers can pitch him an urgent new storybook, what they all need to do by Christmas Eve if they want to make sure they all stay employed through the holidays and stuff. But hilariously, their super cool new idea is just to mimic current day Disney and totally give up on creative thinking, and instead just outsource their workload by bringing in a top-notch genius writer called Miles Finch for a shitload of wonga.
Nice.
Elsewhere, Buddy soon does what all us blokes do whenever we're made to do the hoovering once a year, and uses a sucky pipe in the mailroom to vacuum various body parts for shits and giggles, before he makes friends with a local miscreant and gets totally blattered after mistaking a flask of booze for maple syrup, and soon ends up homoerotically molesting an ex-con and doing ludicrous dances on top of a small desk.
Okay.
And naturally, Walter is proper vexed after he's interrupted in the middle of trying to convince the legendary Miles Finch to come in and help their failing business. But luckily, the fact his long-lost son with special needs is causing havoc in the local mailroom doesn't quite scare off that Finchy bloke completely, given the size of the paycheck they're offering him, and he soon agrees to come in to help them for a few hours. That evening, Buddy takes his cutesy and sometimes nudie floozy out on a date, where he treats her to a crappy cup of coffee, what he hilariously thinks is the best in the world, after falling prey to manipulative urban advertising like a right Wally. Before then staring at some giant fuck-off Christmas trees and getting his first ever snog in a small ice rink. And man, maybe I need to take tips from this virgin incel man-child fella, because I just can't believe he somehow got a partner within days of hitting the big city whilst I've lived here all my life and can barely get a girl to return a polite wave.
Bruh.
The next day, the arrogant and volatile Miles Finch bursts in to pitch them some of his story ideas from his little black book of genius designs. But they're soon interrupted by Walter's son yelling about how he's fallen in love with a local department store whore. But Walter Hobbs don't really care about no stinking department store whore, and tells him to stop yelling about potentially losing his V-plates at age 30 and get the frig out already. But hilariously, Buddy innocently mistakes the small bloke with dwarfism for an actual elf, which totally triggers this tiny fella with literal small man syndrome, and who warns him to stop doing naughty microaggressions or else he'll report them all to HR and get him cancelled and shit. But Buddy just won't stop, and soon gets himself smacked up for implying he might be a bit of an angry elf. And after Miles storms off in a strop and thereby leaving everyone in the room on the chopping block just in time for Christmas, Walter totally snaps and tells his tarded son to get out of his life already. But luckily, his incompetent writing staff soon find Finch's little black notebook and instructs them to totally nick all his genius ideas and make up a storyboard what they can pitch to their boss in a few hours and fraudulently pass off as their own work and stuff. So a disheartened Buddy writes what's effectively a suicide note on a small Etch-a-Sketch and wanders off to a nearby bridge and presumably to totally top himself. And before you can say, this is the darkest shit in a children's film since that horse what drowned in the mud in the Neverending Story back in the day, Michael bursts into his dad's office to cry and whine about his brother going missing. And poor Walter just can't believe this is now the second time in one night that his kid has interrupted an important pitch meeting, and seemingly just can't catch a frigging break. And after Michael tells him how selfish he is, only thinking about himself by focusing on the work that's keeping a roof over their head and their family afloat at Christmas time, Walty Boy totally cucks and tells his boss to stick his shitty job where the sun don't shine, as the pair soon head out to go find their dopey relative. And before said dopey relative can chuck himself over a bridge, given he didn't fit in either the elf or human worlds, he soon sees that Santa Claus fella having some mid-air motor troubles, before totally crashing in Central Park, giving Christmas cheer as an all-time low. Well, it is New York City, where everyone is surrounded by giant super rats and nutters that rape people in broad daylight and then even imprison good Samaritans that dare try to help out fellow citizens and shit. And after Buddy arrives to help his own straight-up trafficker, what he'd do anything for, given he seems to have an intense form of Stockholm Syndrome, Santa tries to shank him after thinking he's a random city hobo what's just trying to rob his merch. Until Buddy says, "Hang about, bro, 'cause it's totally me. It's that mentally retarded human elf fella what loves eating medical supplies." And naturally, Santa pretends to be well relieved that he now has a crack engineer to work on his super expensive top-of-the-range sleigh, even though everything seems to go wrong when his fellas around. So he just tells him to go find the Kringle 3000 turbo engine machine what conked out and fell off somewhere in the woods, and help him get back into the air pronto. 'Cause there's a bunch of park rangers what are hunting me down, and also I'm well behind schedule, bro. And after Jovi stops panicking after the local news reports something airborne has just crashed in New York in the early 2000s, she soon spots shoddy shots of Buddy wandering around Central Park and looking like Bigfoot for some reason, and so she promptly hot-tails it down there. Whilst back in the woods, Mike and his dad soon find the Kringle 3000 thing, and Walter promptly takes a moment to apologise to his firstborn boy for saying a bunch of bad things and presumably also for firing him on his first day of employment. So they hug it out and get the busted up car park back to St. Nicholas, where Buddy soon gets to work pimping his ride, while Santa proves he's the real deal by telling Michael to feel around in his bulging sack. It's steady. 'Cause that skateboard he wanted for Crimbo is totally in there, though the lazy bastard seemingly hasn't even bothered to wrap it. Liberties! So, given his brief burst of belief makes an old man's gizmo rise, it is steady. Michael nicks his list and reads out what everyone wants for Christmas live on TV, to totally prove that the bona fide Santa bloke really did just crash in downtown New York. And after humiliating a local news reporter by publicly revealing that she wants her boyfriend to finally commit and propose to her for Christmas, they shut off all the cameras. And it looks like it's curtains for the #1 mythological magic man who's currently being chased by the Central Park filth because reasons. But luckily, Buddy finally gets the booster working for a few seconds before it gets immediately knocked off by the top of a small statue. Kyah, if only that BLM lot pulled that one down a few summers ago. Anyway, as a last resort, that Jovi bird swallows her pride and soon becomes a public nuisance by singing crappy Crimbo songs to try and generate fuel for Santa's busted up car. Was some shit. But turns out the singing is proper infectious, and soon everyone is joining in with the impromptu caroling service without a park permit, including Walter and his wife, cute kids in their cosy bedrooms, and even gruff bikers in random bars. And luckily, it's totally enough to max out the clausometer and get the morbidly obese home intruder back on his way, as both Buddy and his new family all manage to finally save Christmas despite Santa being about 3 hours behind schedule to deliver the goods to 7 billion people on planet Earth in one night.
What?
And we end with Papa Elf telling us via narration how Buddy spread a load of Christmas cheer around a miserable city, and taught a grumpy Scrooge bloke the error of his ways, which he promptly made amends for by immediately commercialising his own son's mental illness and turning his balmy tale into a highly profitable storybook. Huzzah! Whilst the now loved up Buddy and Jovi totally visit said Papa fella, and now with a new little infant of their own, given the guy who couldn't figure out how to use an escalator somehow knows how to get balls deep in a bird and get her up the duff. And that's it. That's the movie. Though my favourite part was Buddy's reaction to seeing a black elf for the first time. 'Cause he just can't believe how diverse New York City is compared to the North Pole. What just seems to be some kind of ethno-state, and technically full of multicoloured people, but not in the good way. But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Considering that mail thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this flick in the comments if you have time, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.